Daytona, Florida, January 31st, 1970. The start of the first Manufacturers' World Championship event for sports cars and prototypes. A series of international races that would culminate in a decisive victory for Porsche. The weather was warm in Daytona as the crowd gathered for the 24-hour race. The bands were playing and there were plenty of pretty girls on hand, including the exotic Miss Universe, who had already won her championship. But for the rest, preparing to enter the crucible of racing, it was a moment of quiet tension. The skill and technical knowledge of the manufacturers, the engineers, the drivers, and the mechanics were about to be put to the test. Porsche had won in 1969, and now the time had come to defend the World Championship. The pace car led off the Indianapolis start, some slow warm-up laps, and then the pack sprang open. In the first starting row, with the fastest practice times, were a Ferrari 512 and a Porsche 917. Porsche had put its top 1970 cars under the direction of the British John Wyatt. Wyatt formerly handled the Aston Martin and the operations of the Ford GT40. Now, Wyatt's team manager, David York, was sending two Porsche teams into competition against Jackie Ickx and Mario Andretti in Ferraris. Wyatt's combinations were Joseph Siffert and the Englishman Brian Redman, plus Pedro Rodriguez and the new Finnish talent, Leo Kinnunen. The 24-hour Daytona is a relatively new event. The first 24 hours were driven in 1966, modeled after the great Le Mans. The Daytona event began in the afternoon on a high-speed track with two steeply banked curves, which most cars entered at full speed. At Daytona, the drivers could hit top speeds of more than 187 miles per hour, Ferraris and Porsches alike, and also the new threat, the Matra. Lap averages reached 125 miles per hour and a bit above. After 12 hours, with half the distance covered, both Porsche 917s, with Rodriguez and Kinnunen, and with Siffert and Redman, pulled ahead of the leading Ferrari, driven by Andretti and Ickx. In fourth place was the Matra with Brabham and Sever. The 917 used at Daytona had the 4.5-liter engine, with less horsepower than the Ferrari. It was also somewhat lighter than the Italian car. After 16 and a half hours of this tough race, the Siffert-Redman 917 pulled into the pits with clutch damage. Rodriguez and Kinnunen now had the lead. Ferrari was left in second place. In the pits, the mechanics worked quickly and silently. It was the 917's last pit stop. It's not often that a 24-hour race is exciting right up to the last moment. But this one went right down to the wire. This Porsche continued to stay in the lead. But in the last 2 hours, there was a tough duel between Siffert and Andretti, a battle for second place. The Porsche kept gaining on the Ferrari. Then Siffert overtook Andretti and went ahead in the final 6 minutes. Porsche finished first and second. Ferraris came in third, fourth, and fifth. And so, after the first event of the Manufacturers' World Championship, the score was 1-0 for Porsche. Sebring's 12 Hours, the second event, another American race. Racing fans flocked to this remote converted airfield in the middle of Florida, a track 5.2 miles long. There were 4 Porsche 917s entered in the race, 2 of them sponsored by the Gulf Oil Corporation, and 2 sponsored by the Porsche+Audi division of Volkswagen of America. In addition, a number of private drivers entered with 908s, the only 3-liter machines with 360 horsepower, naturally not the equal of the 4.5-liter Porsches or the Ferraris. Gulf started the John Wyatt team, which had won at Daytona, Siffert, Redman, Rodriguez, and Kinnunen. Driving for Porsche+Audi was the Salzburg team, Vic Elfert with Kurt Ahrens, Hans Hermann, and the Austrian Rudi Linz. The race started at 10 in the morning. That meant that the last 3 hours would be run in darkness. Siffert drove the fastest lap in 2:33:11. That's an average of 123 miles per hour, a new record. This airport course has several mean, sharp curves. Sebring gave Porsche more than its share of bad luck. Vic Elfert in a Porsche+Audi 917 collided with a Gran Turismo car, which apparently blocked him while he was passing. Rudi Linz blew the engine of the other Porsche+Audi entry. Both Gulf Porsches had a new front suspension system that had never been tested in a 12-hour race, and they had difficulties. But there was one Porsche, number 48, that ran the 12 hours like clockwork, a 908, entered privately by Solar Productions and driven by Peter Revson and actor Steve McQueen. The top Ferraris were also having trouble, so McQueen and Revson managed to finish in second place in this 12-hour race, just 23 seconds behind the winning Ferrari, driven by Mario Andretti. The third event in the Manufacturers' World Championship was the 1,000-kilometer race at Brands Hatch in England. Ferrari and Porsche had won one race apiece. It was raining as the cars went into the first lap, and it's hard to remember a race in which so many top drivers spun out. In this hard rain, sprays of water foamed out behind the cars, making it hard to stay in position and even harder to pass. The spectators who braved the rain to watch this race at Brands Hatch, southeast of London, saw some spectacular driving and exciting duels. The Gulf Porsche, driven by John Wyer's team, faced stiff competition from Ferrari, from the Alfa Romeo, driven by Courage and de Adamec, and from the Matra, driven by Brabham, Beltoise, and Pescarolo. Entered for Porsche Salzburg was the New Zealand Grand Prix driver Dennis Hume, combined with Vic Elfert. The efficient British flagmen were kept busy warning drivers away from blocking cars and signaling drivers on the rain-swept course that competitors were about to pass. Despite the heavy downpour, there was no serious accident. The track became somewhat drier during the middle of the race, but then light rains began to fall again. The Brands Hatch roadway is relatively short. One lap is only 2.65 miles. It takes 235 laps to complete the 1,000-kilometer race. Here at Brands Hatch, Porsche gained one of its greatest wins, a four-way victory. In first place, Rodriguez and Kinnunen with the Gulf 4.5-liter Porsche, then Hermann and Atwood with the Zafin. In fourth place, the 908, entered by the Finnish Antti Vihuri team and driven by Lane and Van Lennep. Ferrari took fifth place, followed by another Porsche, the Martini Racing Team's 908, driven by Larousse and Koch. Finally, in seventh place, the Swedes, Bonnier and Wiesel in a Lola. The winners, Rodriguez and Kinnunen, were greeted by several stewardesses from BOAC, one of the sponsors of the Brands Hatch race. Porsche took the lead in the International Series